Martin, I wanted to bring us back to issues at home. So, I doubt you've seen or heard of Gary Stevenson, have you?
Don't think so.
But so he's an ex-city trader, and he's doing some really important work highlighting wealth inequality in this country, and he's really, really taken off. But people criticize his message. So he essentially says is that we should tax wealth, not work. And yeah, his critics say that this is too simplistic, and that he's almost kicking away the ladder to all the young people in this country who do want to work hard. How would you address this gross wealth inequality that we have? And do you think the message is a bit too simplistic?
Well, I don't know his work, though it's not the first time he's that sort of idea has floated. I don't think there is any plausible wealth tax which would offset taxing income. It depends on what you mean by taxing income. Do you include value-added tax? Is that a tax on income? It's a tax on current spending. So very crudely, so the first is numerical plausibility. The total tax take in our country relative to GDP, very roughly, is about 40%. Okay? 40% of GDP is taxed. I don't know the exact ratio of wealth to GDP. It's probably 3 times, something like 3 times. If you taxed 40% of GDP from capital alone, you would be taxing vastly more than the income from capital. That's vastly more than the profit share in GDP, a total income from capital, all of it. So to pay this tax, people would have to draw down their capital. And so the economy would become decapitalized. I mean, basically, people would be selling capital. They couldn't sell it to other people here because there wouldn't be people who would buy it. So you'd be selling it abroad. How else could they pay this tax? Alternatively, they would be handing the capital stock over to the state, and the state would end up owning it. That doesn't seem to be very sensible. So at the macroeconomic level, there is no plausible tax on capital that could offset the full range of income tax that we charge. Now, it's true, some of the income tax includes corporate taxes, but corporate taxes are not quite the same as wealth taxes. And some of them are taxes on land, but that's pretty small part of the tax revenue. And some of it's tax on spending. I don't know whether he's, as I said, thinking of that as an income tax or as a tax on capital, but basically it would be really a variant on income tax. So an expenditure tax is very close to an income tax. That's a complicated issue. So basically, I don't think there's any form of capital taxation that can offset income tax in full. That said, it's also true, we don't want to tax capital in such a way that we actually leads to capital destruction, because we all live on the capital that is invested. But you can tax some things relatively without creating destruction. And the most obvious is land. So, because land isn't accumulated, it's a natural asset. And much of the value of land is just location. And you can certainly increase taxes on land. Henry George argued for that in the 19th century, and I've argued this for a long time. Our property taxes are very low. They're not efficient. So you could imagine taxing land reasonably higher, at a higher level. You could make the income tax more progressive, so tax wealthy people more, and a lot of their income does come from income from capital. The problem with that is it also it's likely to lead to capital flight and or capital destruction, just less savings and less investment. So there's damage there. And most people would argue that the scale of increased taxes we could raise by very high taxes on high earners, including large owners of productive capital, the amount of income you would get relative to the loss of incentives as overall wouldn't really be very large. So without going into all the detail, my own guess would be that without trying to destroy the economy, you obviously don't want to destroy all capital. You could shift income tax probably somewhat more in a progressive direction, and I've indicated the tax on land is the most obvious way. Some people suggest you could impose a wealth tax of perhaps 1 or 2% of the value of the wealth, which would be quite significant. 1 or 2% of the wealth would pay perhaps 6% of GDP. That would be quite extreme. That would make a difference. But you can see, since we spend about more than 40% of GDP, it wouldn't be enough to actually pay for everything that the government provides. In the end, you can't really support a state that spends 40 to 45% of GDP without income taxes, because income is inevitably the principal source of tax revenue at these levels of the state. So if you really want to do what he says, you have to start cutting spending. And most of the spending in the British state, like most modern states, goes on welfare of various kinds, pensions, health, things like this. And these are the things we don't want to cut. So directionally, I have sympathy with this, but as actually a means of funding the state we want is going to go very small way to solve the problem. It's just not a big enough resource unless you're prepared essentially to penalize all capital owners, in which case, who's going to accumulate capital? Who's going to save and invest? I mean, obviously, they're not going to do so.